Is there anything quite like a campfire? The community that's built there by people sharing their stories and singing their songs is truly special and so intimate. It's like being 10 years of age again and sharing all your secrets with your best friend. And that openness and vulnerability is exactly what we should see in the greatest community on earth, the church. There are no walls out here, and there should be no walls of defense towards God or each other, even if we have been hurt. To be on a journey as God's family, going through the highs and lows of life, suffering and laughing together, that's what I want. Not some holy huddle where we all pretend everything is okay, but a real community who believes in the God of miracles, but also in the God of the trials. That's what the world needs too. So let's give out the invites, put aside our selfish ways, and
all right, seems like a young accountant, fresh out of college, just passed his CPA. He was at his first interview with a big firm. And he's sitting across the table from the human resource guy. And near the end of the interview, the human resource guy says, "Well, what starting salary were you thinking about?" And the accountant said, "Well, I was kind of thinking in the neighborhood of $100,000 depending on the benefit package." And the HR guy says, "Oh, okay. Well, would you like, say, a package of a 5-week vacation, full medical and dental, and company retirement fund up to 50% of your salary, and executive share option scheme, a profitable related pay, and company car leased every 2 years, say, I don't know, 5 Series BMW?" That young accountant suddenly said, "Wow, are you kidding?" And the HR said, "Yeah, but you started it." Exactly. Compensation. That's a big topic for Americans. Well, what about for Christians? I mean, really, think about it. Some of you're toying with the idea of really letting Jesus take over. It's going to be Him. So what's your package? What's going to be your pay? And are there different criteria that need to be met in order for your pay package to be worth something? For instance, will experience give you a bump? Or is overtime a factor? Or what about if you grow up in a Christian home? Is that going to be to your advantage? Well, speaking of it, what if you don't? I mean, would there be a serious docking if you end up coming to Christ late in life? You guys, the story that we're going to look at that Jesus told a long time ago, it is so relevant. And this story that He told a long time ago largely was met with responses of, "Okay, that's unfair. Jesus, this isn't right." That's how most people reacted to the story that He told. And the reason they reacted, a lot of people thought it was a scandalous story. And the reason they thought it was a scandalous story is that it was. You guys, this is a story of a shockingly generous and unimaginable, compassionate father. You just got to look at this. Look at the screen. This is Matthew chapter 20, verse 1. Jesus begins, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner or an estate owner who went out early one morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay the normal daily wage and sent them out to work. At 9 o'clock in the morning, he was passing through the marketplace and saw some of the people standing around doing nothing. So he hired them, telling them he would pay them whatever was right at the end of the day. So they went to work in the vineyard at noon and again at 3 o'clock, he did the same thing. At 5 o'clock that afternoon, he was in town again and saw some more people standing around. He asked them, "Why haven't you been working today?" Well, they replied, "Because no one hired us." The landowner told them, "Then go out and join the others in my vineyard." That evening, he told the foreman to call the workers in and pay them, beginning with the last workers first. When those hired at 5 o'clock were paid, each received a full day's wage. When those hired first came to get their pay, they assumed they would receive more. But they too were paid a day's wage. When they received their pay, they protested to the owner. Those people worked only 1 hour, and you paid them just as much as you paid us who worked all day in scorching heat. He answered one of them, "Friend, I haven't been unfair. Didn't you agree to work all day for the usual wage? Take your money and go. I wanted to pay this last worker the same as you. Is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money? Should you be jealous because I am kind to others? So those who are last now will be first then, and those who are first will be last." Let me say up front that unlike last week when we talked about the shrewd steward, the shrewd manager, this story is not so much about work or about job or about workers or about commitment or about pay or about wages or about people. The point of this story is about a king who has a kingdom that is so radically different than any kingdom we know of here on earth. Economically, it would be a bust. For morale, it seems like it would just be this huge sinkhole that people would just fall through. You don't find this kind of thinking on earth. It's about a king who is so ridiculous with his grace. It makes no earthly sense. Who is so scandalous with giving people what they don't deserve to get, that when he does it, some people get mad and they protest, and some scratch their head and say, "I just don't think this is right." And some people, when they see this generous king who undermines the whole human system of merit and worthiness and hard work, who delights in giving what is not earned, and who takes joy in lavishing people with unmerited gifts, some people who see that generous benefactor just can't take their eyes away. They can't quit looking at it. It's like they see what's happening and they say, "This is just scandalous and it's wrong." But it's undeniably kind and good-hearted and fantastic and delicious. I can't look away. It just seems too good to be true. Let me tell you something about grace. We're not selling it too good to be true. We don't sell it good enough. We don't. We don't go near as far as we should go or could go to explain it. You know why? Because it's boundless. This parable that Jesus told it's a masterpiece. It's my second favorite. The first one I'm saving for the last. We got to do the lost son on the last one of this series. But this is my second favorite one. This is number 2 for me. It starts with a common scene that everybody Jesus was talking to would immediately recognize. Just as we have employment agencies, well, they had places where people who wanted work would gather. And those who could provide the work would go and hire. The Jewish workday begins at 6 a.m. And so when they talk about the 3rd hour, well, that would be 9 a.m., the 6th hour, noon, and so on. So here, the strongest and those young with strong backs would generally be chosen first. Whoever was left would be left to beg. If you didn't get work that day, then you didn't get food that day. Now, the first surprise Jesus kind of throws out as he begins this story is about the landowner, the estate owner that goes out early in the morning to hire people. Now, back in those days, the landowner generally didn't do the hiring and the firing. That was left for his foreman. And Jesus doesn't bring the foreman of this story until nearly the end. You remember, some of you were with us this last summer. We went through that series on Ruth. You remember Boaz didn't hire Ruth. He was the landowner, and he goes up into his fields during the morning. And it's there that he notices, oh, who's the beautiful woman? And then the foreman says, oh, she's the Moabite. I hired her today. He knows all about her. Remember that? That was generally left with the foreman. So I think what Jesus is doing is something very significant here. I think what he's saying is, in the kingdom of God, the king himself goes to find those who are his own. So what that says is, there is no subject too low to receive the full attention of God. That's the first thing I want you to put on your program. The call belongs to God. That's number one. It's his. Now Jesus is going to tell us stories about how his father is like the widow that looks for the lost coin, and like the shepherd that looks for the lost sheep, and like the father who looks for the lost son. Jesus says, my Father doesn't wait for people to come to me. He goes to them, and then he keeps looking. And you guys, this isn't like a change in God from the Old Testament. A lot of people, they read the Old Testament stories, they don't understand the context. All they see is God, killing women and children and wiping out whole nations. What we don't realize is they've gone centuries sacrificing their own kids to foreign gods. So when you see him telling these people to go and wipe out somebody, that's not God being ruthless and some ugly tyrant. No, he's given them multiple centuries to change, and they didn't do it. But then all of a sudden we come to the New Testament and we see what we think is a different God, and it's almost like the God of the Old Testament. When he comes to he became a Christian. He changed. What happened? He was just the same. We just haven't understood. This heart of God that seeks after his children, that's been from the beginning. Look at this great little oasis in the middle of a book that's kind of tough to read through. This is 2 Chronicles chapter 16 and verse 9. The eyes of the Lord search the whole earth in order to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. Look at the word picture you got there. I mean, he's just looking. He's just trying to find someone. The call belongs to God. Number two, the timing belongs to God. I think there's a tendency to put a lot of that weight on us. He goes at 6. He goes again at 9. He goes at 12. He goes at 3. He goes at 5 with 1 hour left on the work day. His search is constant. It never lets up. Does anybody have any idea why Jesus hasn't come back yet? The main reason is that God is not stopping in order that every single person's attention might maybe have a moment of looking toward him, and he is wooing them with everything he is into his kingdom. Giving them a choice, not forcing them. Love doesn't force. But letting them know as much as he will that we take a step in faith to follow him. He's been doing it from the dawn of time, and God will continue doing it, that right up to the last moment. That's his nature. He's a rescuer by nature. Crazy. And the reason is because he's got something to give. The big prize is him, and the reward belongs to God. And he's it. It's his. It's him. And God's reward, his gift, his grace, is never based on personal accomplishments. Oh, goodness. And it's not based on time on the job or tasks completed or obedience that's been rendered. Well, I'm right with God because I obeyed perfectly. Come on, people. It's not based on me. It's not based on what I know, what I understand. In God's kingdom, his reward system cannot possibly be earned. It can only be received. The reward belongs to God. We don't earn it. He gives it. It's not achieved. It's received. You want to know why his reward system bothers some of us? Seems so unfair to some of us? Because we have absolutely no control over it. And we like to think that we control stuff. We look at our life and we look at other people's life and we say, got that one. We love to think that we've got a handle. We've got a grasp, we've got understanding that puts us in a place where we're not. We can't understand God or his word correctly enough. We can't live out what we do understand perfectly enough. And on top of all of that, we can't even believe it fully enough. So what are you left with? All I can do is receive it because my understanding falls short and my behavior falls short and my faith falls short. But God still calls me in His perfect timing into a kingdom, and He covers me with a reward that's called grace. Generously giving me what I don't deserve and could never earn. I think what Jesus is doing in this story, among a whole bunch of things, I think His main thing is He's teaching us, trying to teach us something that makes very little sense to us. He's cracking the door open to what the kingdom of heaven is like. Much different, as I've already said, than any kingdom on earth. He's cracking the door open to this understanding of grace. And the reason this is so difficult for us to understand is because we so rarely see it. Our world is largely graceless. The papers, the media, the TV, the radio, the internet, all mostly share news of a world marked by economic failure, marked by violence, marked by greed, marked by religious war, marked by family breakdowns, marked by government shutdowns. Side note, 110 years ago, the chaplain to the U.S. Senate was a guy by the name of Edward Hale. And we were going through a lot in our country at that time. This is 1903. So some reporter goes up to him and says, "So, Mr. Edward Hale, do you pray for our senators of our United States Senate?" You know what his response was? He said, "No, I look at the senators and I pray for the country." Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? What goes around comes around. You guys, that's a perfect example that illustrates our graceless society. People unwilling to budge, unwilling to move, standing in opposition with no intention of finding the solution for the betterment of our country. Oh no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to let you go into our federal parks, our national park. We can't walk into the park. Good grief. And I guess this is a little political, isn't it? I'm not trying to, but you just kind of, okay, let's back on course. So when we get a real example of real grace in this other kingdom, and it kind of finds its way to show itself here among us, well, we're left with how we're going to respond. And up to this point in the story and on your outline, we have only spoken of God's call, God's timing, God's reward, all elements of His grace. But how we react to God's grace belongs to us. That's number 4. The response is ours. The response belongs to us. And the first response of man that Jesus exposed is what I think I deserve. What I think I deserve. When the all-day workers saw that the 1-hour workers received an all-day wage, they assumed that they were going to get more than an all-day wage. And going down that path of asking God to give me what I deserve is a very dangerous path. Philip Yancey, in his book, What's So Amazing About Grace, has this quote. Look at the screen. The workers' discontent aroused from the scandalous mathematics of grace. They would not accept that their employer had the right to do what he wanted with his money when it meant paying scoundrels 12 times what they deserved. Many Christians who study this parable identify with the employees who put in a full day's work rather than the add-ons at the end of the day. We like to think of ourselves as responsible workers. And the employer's strange behavior baffles us as it did the original hearers. We risk missing the story's point, that God dispenses gifts, not wages. If paid on the basis of fairness, we would all end up in hell. I'm telling you guys, when we're dealing with a holy God who dwells in dazzling whiteness of perfection, the last thing we want is for what we deserve to determine whether or not we get to live in His presence. You don't want that. Is not the road we want. We don't want what we deserve. Not when the backdrop is a holy God. The next human response Jesus exposes is how I think I compare. deserve and how I think I compare. And this response really comes out in verse 12. The last workers put in only 1 easy hour, the all-day workers said, and you just made them equal to us, who slaved all day under a scorching sun. You've made them equal to us. Now let's just back up and think about what they're saying. The all-day workers actually thought they were superior to the one-day workers. You know what's really problematic with that? Our worth has nothing to do with the amount of time we work. That's human thinking. That's earthly kingdom. Jesus is telling us about another kingdom. They didn't say, you're treating us like the 1 hour workers. Oh, no. The all-day workers said, you're treating us like the 1 hour workers. You're letting the 1 hour workers be treated like one of us. You see that? I kind of screwed that up. You understand the difference? They didn't feel like they were lowering the all-day workers. The all-day workers didn't think they were lowering themselves down to the 1 hour. No, they thought he was elevating the 1 hours up to them. And that's what got them. They were upset over what they had received, and it made them envious. The all-dayers thought they were worth a lot more than the 1 hour guy. And you talk about a dangerous path. Look at this downward progression. It starts with comparing yourself with others. And that degenerates to coveting what somebody else gets, which falls even farther down into complaining what you get, which finally ends up criticizing the gift giver. Criticizing God. Let me tell you something. Anybody that wants to receive the grace of God with hands up and palms open, you're going to have a hard time receiving what God is giving if your fists are tight and you're criticizing God for Him doing what He's doing. You're criticizing Him for His generosity. It's hard to receive where you're even critical of the gift giver. Responding how I think I compare, we do not want that road. We don't. And we all do it. Well, that person, you see the mistake they made? Yeah, I wonder. Our lack of forgiveness for them is indicating that we are living on our own work schedule. We think we stand right because of who we are and the mistakes we haven't made. Jesus is trying to open our eyes. Just a couple observations. Did you notice how the landowner had the foreman have the 1 hour guys come first to pay so that the all-day guys could see what the 1 hour guys made, what they received, what they got? Did you notice that? Why? Was the landowner some kind of sadistic guy that just wanted to gig the all-dayers? Watch these guys that busted it for me in the vineyard. Man, I went with that. Come on, you guys, that's not what he's thinking. Why in the world would the landowner want to pay the 1 hour guys first for the other all-dayers to see? Do you think it's possible that maybe God wants us to see how generous He is so that we might catch on? Would our world be affected by a church that became shockingly generous? Do you think people might give serious thought to following Jesus if they saw His followers treating other people better than they should be treated? Loving them unconditionally? Serving them unselfishly? There is a power in treating people better than they deserve to be treated that will change Northwest Arkansas. It'll change it. You know, we all want a whole bunch of people to come in these doors so that we can be a bright, shining light for God's kingdom, and many people will come to put their trust in Jesus, follow Him, find out that there's something after this life. We want that. Do you know the best way for us to evangelize? Treating people better than they deserve to be treated. Loving them unconditionally, serving them unselfishly. That's it. The second observation, I couldn't help but notice how the estate owner hired people for just 1 hour. 1 hour? Seriously? How much work could be done in 1 hour? Do you think it's possible that the estate owner wasn't so much thinking about the work as much as he was about the worker? Do you think maybe that's what was going through our Master's mind when he looked at the thief on the cross? I mean, how much in the world could that thief do for the kingdom of God? He's just about dead. Can we see the heart of our God? He is way more concerned about the person than he is about the work that that person might do. Again, why is it that this story is told? Do you think we might have a rewriting of our thinking? And we would end up saying, it's not so much about what this person could do in this church. It's about that person. What if we looked at people that way? Not on what they could give us, but on the delight that it would bring to God for them to say, I'm yours. I mean, the landowner, who needed more? The landowner needed 1 hour of work, or the worker needed money to take care of his family? Does God really need us because of all of the work that he's got to get done? Is that what this is? Man, I wish those people would become part of my church. Because I got a lot of things that need to be done in the kingdom. Man, I've only got a few people to do it. Is that our God? You really think he needs us like that? Let me put, who needs who more? Does God really need us? Or do we really need God? Y'all, this is a great story. This is a great reminder. This story doesn't have an ending. It's kind of like Jonah. You know, have you read the Old Testament story of Jonah? It just kind of leaves you hanging. But I found an ending to this story on the internet. And since this is a series on storytelling, doesn't it make sense? Okay, I'm going to finish the story for you. I'm going to pick up where Jesus left off. That's serious tongue-in-cheek. But here we go. The guy that's the 1 hour worker in this story, his name is James. Isn't that appropriate? James couldn't believe his luck. Only worked for 1 hour, overlooked all day in the marketplace. Then this. His wife Miriam was getting nervous. She swept the dirt floor the third time she breathed a prayer to God. Oh God, where is my James? It's getting late. I'm sure he didn't find work today, just like yesterday, just like the day before. I went by the marketplace this afternoon, and he was still standing there with the other men looking for work. Where is he, Lord? Has something happened to him? Or is he just too ashamed to come home empty-handed again? At that moment, her 5-year-old daughter, Rebecca, pulled at her skirt. That was a funny thing to say right there. Mommy, where's Daddy? I'm hungry. Will he bring us something to eat tonight? At that moment, James came through the door with a smile on his face and his arms full of food. He said, Miriam, Becky, prepare the table. Look, I've got bread, I've got cheese, I've got figs, I've got honey for 2 of the sweetest girls in my life. Miriam just stared in astonishment and stuttered, But James, where did you get all this? I know you didn't work because I saw you standing with the other unemployed men at 4 o'clock this afternoon. What happened? James said, Miriam, may God be praised. The most amazing thing happened to me this afternoon. I was standing there thinking about what it would be like to go another day without work and another day without food. I was so discouraged because I didn't think I could stand another night to blame Becky that there was nothing to eat. And then at 5 o'clock, Mr. Ben Yakov, the rich man who owns the vineyard outside the village, he showed up. He said, why aren't you guys working? We said, because no one has hired us. He said, well, I'll hire you. Come on, hop in the car. You can work in my vineyard. I knew since it was late in the day, I would only earn a few pennies, but that was better than nothing. And perhaps I could bargain for a few pieces of bread. And when we got there, I saw lots of men working. And I could tell they had been working there all day because they were tired and dusty. I worked for about an hour when Mr. Ben Yakov called us to be paid. And can you believe it? He paid those of us who had only worked an hour first. I was first in line, and when I held out my hand, I couldn't believe my eyes. He gave me a full day's wage. And at first I said, Mr. Yakov, did you make a mistake? I only worked for 1 hour, sir. He smiled and shrugged his shoulders and said, I have plenty to give. Just take it. I know it doesn't make any sense, but he paid all the workers the same. He paid us the same as those who had worked 12 hours or 8 hours or 6 hours. And the others griped about it at first, but after a few minutes, they were just glad to see us get paid too. I was so happy. I took the money and ran straight to the market and bought all this food. Doesn't it look delicious? Let's just thank God and let's dig in. As Miriam set the table, she looked at the food and said, James, there are only 3 loaves here and the cheese has been cut in half, and I know food prices. With a full day's wage, you should have been able to buy 4 loaves and a full wedge of cheese. What happened to the rest of the food? James hung his head like a boy caught with his hand in a cookie jar. He said, I didn't think you'd notice. I hope you don't mind, but on the way home with all this food, I passed by Widow Elizabeth's house. I knew she didn't have much, so I stopped and gave her one of the loaves and some of the cheese. I hope you don't mind, Miriam. Miriam smiled and wiped a tear from her eye and said, of course I don't mind. I think old man Yakov would be glad that his generosity had an effect on you. Let's bow our heads and thank God. I like that ending. You guys, God has so unreasonably been generous with all of us. Maybe you've got somebody in your heart right now that you need to pass that generosity on to. Maybe it's somebody that did you wrong. And you need to do something right away. Maybe this afternoon. Maybe this week. Do something for them. Maybe He's calling you to invest in someone or to give someone something that there's no way they could ever repay you. No way. Not on this earth. When I make those suggestions, is there something in you that says, well, Jimmo, that isn't fair. That guy did me wrong. That person will never appreciate my gift. Y'all, it isn't fair. It's grace. It's grace.